All right, now I think we're going to handle the metal band on his head, on his chin, and then maybe we'll do the sword. Same process as before. We're just going to go through, color pick, and paint. I'm going to do the same thing that we did with some of the other parts, like the belt, where I'm going to take the color from the helmet and kind of pepper that into the shadow side, like here. And then I'm going to do a little on top as well. A little brighter though. And then here, one thing we'll try to do is anywhere things intersect, make it try to look like a natural intersection and not just hard flat polygon going into another hard flat polygon. So if you can give it even just a little treatment, generally it'll blend in a lot better. Do a little thicker bevels here, because when we zoom out, it's not as obvious. It's one thing to watch out for too, is how you want your detail to read. And sometimes we zoom in too much, which is really easy to do because it helps accuracy too, but sometimes you lose track of scale. Or at least I know I do, and so I have to zoom out. Like, oh, okay, maybe my bevels, I want them to be this big. And so it reads a little cleaner, a little more cartoony. So I hope that sold it a little more. What I just did there, I'll undo it from there to that. Not a huge change, but big enough that it kind of changes the feel. cool, just rounding out the form a little more. This one is a little weird. I'm going to pull that up, shadow up a bit. Then give it a little more contrast so we see the shape a little better. Cool. Okay. So now we got sword and then the helm. So one thing with the sword, the storm, one thing with the sword that's standing out to me is how the handle is so dark right now, and I want to just put like some cloth wrap or something on there, maybe something that matches his chest, but like maybe a little darker and a little redder. So let's hide the sword, or everything but the sword, and let's just paint that in. I'm going to use the dark to our advantage here and kind of use that and pretend it's our lines. Now, there is stuff over it, so I don't want to make it too bright, because there's going to be shadows casting on it from the rope and the hand and everything, so we'll just do enough to make it read. And this is a square shape, so it's going to be a little weird going around the corner. But that's okay, we fake it. Still looks like it works, right? Yeah. You can fake a lot, despite your geometry. Or I guess in spite of your geometry. The paint really does most of the work. Now this is mirrored on both sides, but the side is not, so it's kind of funky. You just got to paint it until you get as little or as few seams as possible. But considering what we're going to be seeing it from and the distance and stuff, shouldn't be too big of a deal, but something to keep in mind. you work it over back and forth a couple times, and it generally will look fine. Get the job done. So it might not look perfect, but we could probably move on. Considering, let's take a look. Yeah, that's how much you're going to see of it. So it's good to keep things in perspective when you're doing this. I don't mean the camera mode. I just mean knowing when and where you'll see it, how much of it you'll actually see, that kind of thing. And so it's really easy, and you'll see me do it, and I'm sure it happens to you sometimes, where you'll just kind of zone in on something, or I guess zone out on something, and lose track of time and be like, okay, is this really where I could be best spending my time? And you might decide to let it go and just move on, or maybe make a note and come back to it later. But stuff like that, it's like, yeah, there's going to be some seams still in some areas, and if you took the time, you could probably get rid of it even more. But is it going to be that much more noticeable, right? For the time it takes, that kind of thing is worth thinking about. So I think that does the job just fine for what it was. And before, it was just kind of this dark wood that didn't have any read to it, and now we could see, oh, okay, someone threw a little wrap on there. So for me, I think that's a good point, and it tells us to move on to the actual sword. So I'm going to paint the wood now. So we have a good base here already. I'm just trying to think through, like, how do I want to handle it right now, because I could push my darks in a bit more, or maybe just pull out some things highlight wise. Just kind of evaluating the shapes I already have there. Mm. I think I liked what I had. I'm just gonna backtrack a little here. I'm gonna go a lot darker, and I'm just gonna start drawing again. Like I'm torn between, is it too busy? Maybe I just keep it subtle, because it's easy to over detail the grain. At least I find it easy to over detail it. Let's pull out some shapes instead. So I want it to feel like it has some thickness. But not too much, right? It still should be a flat plank. So maybe we keep that around the outside and then a couple shapes on the inside. And then just work getting the surface to have a little subtle interest instead of something overly floorboardy. I mean, don't get me wrong, this guy is supposed to be like a put together kind of practice combat dummy to help you get better at using your weapons, but doesn't mean he's necessarily they put too much attention into making him or that they scrapped them together too quickly, so it's probably somewhere in between. And something like this is maybe where I want to go into Photoshop and then paint in there and bring it back. So we'll see. I like using Photoshop as a supplement to 3D Coat. So let's see if I struggle too much here. Maybe I'll bring it in to Photoshop where I could go a little faster, but then you're constrained to one viewpoint. This is mostly flat, so it's not too bad. Bevel this here so it has a little more thickness on the sides. Just gives it a little more punch. Thankfully, we only have to paint one side because we mirrored it. So we get that side looking good. I'm liking it better now than I did before. But we get it working here, and it'll work on the other side. Now, wood isn't going to be shiny like the metal too. So when we add highlights and stuff, we want to make sure that they're not too bright. Otherwise, it'll kind of feel fake. Either that or it'll feel really wet or like polished. We also want to make sure we treat the side here, because there's like no shading on that right now. So we want to add this edge to be a little brighter. So we'll go ahead and do that. I don't know if it missed it with the light map we did earlier, but it didn't get it at all, huh? So boom, already that makes that side a lot more distinct from that side. And then we'll go in and we'll just add a little gradient too. We'll pick one side to be a little brighter and then work our way up from there. Maybe let's say this is the brighter side. And then I'll probably make the tip itself a little brighter just to identify it as like the tip. We'll see how that works out. Feels better there already. One issue though is it's blending in with the front. Like the value here is kind of similar to the value here. So I might darken it overall. Maybe I'll use polygon tool and turn the opacity down. It'll get sharp edges, but we could clean that up already though. It feels like there's a distinction, right? This happens a lot where you'll be painting and the values kind of blend, even though this is one side and then this is the other. I like to just hit it with a much darker value to bring the whole thing down. So in this case, I'm just using the polygon tool, which is this one right here, which you can get to over here again, and then just tap it, and then boom. So maybe we don't want it as dark, bring it down a little, but now we have a clear distinction. This still looks brighter than that, but there's a front, and then there's the sides. Same thing here, though this one maybe not as much. It's facing upwards, so I'll darken or I'll brighten one of these sides slightly more. To pull them apart. There we go. Now I'll go in and maybe brighten up. Oopsies. Gotta put my opacity back up. I'll brighten up this whole side just slightly. To push that difference. Trying to decide if I like it. Well, we're gonna go back in. Balance stuff up a little more later anyway. Just go over the edge. and then a slight gradient on this side. It already kind of has one, so I might not touch it too much. And we're going to go through and we're going to be putting in gradients with like overlay and stuff soon. So I don't want to go too hard with it, but this will at least give me a little visual distinction, remind me, and then I could decide how much more or less to push it. Plus, it doesn't take too long to just pop that in. I'm not gonna lie, it kind of looks like a face. I've been like staring at it. Like, it kind of looks like a face because of this. But I kind of like the knot too. So I'm like, we could take it out. Maybe just knock it back a bunch. It's still there. I'll knock it back anyway. But maybe you guys won't see that. I don't know. And then the mouth. So we'll see. We'll see if it becomes a problem. Just giving it a little surface detail so it's not completely blank. It can pretty much just be whatever kind of shapes you want to put in there as long as they feel like it fits. Definitely feeling the texture resolution here. And considering we're probably going to be down-resing this even more afterwards, probably shouldn't worry about this too much. Okay, we're going to move on from the sword right now, because I think spent enough time on that. We can look at the before and after there. So it's kind of on par, similar to the shield now. Then we got to do the helmet next. We'll try to do that one a little quicker. And then move on to stuff like his body, the rocks, the grass, probably be a quick one. But we're going to make sure we save before moving on. Alright, taking a quick break from dark wood there. I think I'm going to paint up the grass and the leaf real quick, just to get something a little more finished in there, especially because they're both pretty minor sized shapes. So let's just do that real quick. I mean, it doesn't need much. I don't even know really where I'm going to take these, to be honest. So let's just have at it. And we already got the mask over it, which makes it nice, the alpha. I'm going to start just by highlighting the edges a little more, which works pretty well on stuff like grass. Different foliage to pop out, because they usually have like a ridge around leaves and stuff, which can catch highlights pretty easily. I'm going to try to do one side a little brighter than the other. And then maybe like a fold in the middle. Let's see if that works. I think there's potential. just don't want it to have an outline right next to it. I want it to be around the edges instead. I'm just painting in some fake shadows here to make it look like these leaves or these grass are in front of the other ones. So nothing too crazy, but just some shadows. Pretty close, pretty close. That should do the job. We can always touch up the alpha later too. A lot of times it's not a bad idea to paint the grass first, but I like being able to have it masked out and then kind of edit it from there. But, sometimes too, it depends on your mood. We'll have the ones in front be a little brighter. There we go, and they'll look like they have kind of a fold in them. Probably didn't need to put the line in the middle to get that, but it worked out. All right, so let's see before and after there. So same silhouette and everything, but now we kind of pulled it up. It might be too bright too. Once we see it in the scene, we'll be able to tell once we see it next to the other stuff we made, and we can adjust, of course, from there. Okay. Cool. And then the guy up here. Let me grab the bright green we used down here. We'll use it on this guy. And try something similar. You can kind of bring out the edges a bit. Remember, shift will blur your brush stroke, which is really nice, and control will erase. Hold control while you have the brush selected, and you don't have to switch to brush mode. So it's really nice having both smooth and erase available from your brush tool. Painting some of that light coming off the helm. Tie it together a little. And then I'm just going through with the standard brush, just really lightly painting over it to kind of reduce the contrast in some areas, but also give it kind of like a, I don't know, just like a wash, like a glaze of this green. It's one thing I do a lot more now that I didn't used to, is just paint a lot and then be okay going over the whole thing with a flat color, not even in a blending mode. And it reduces the contrast, sure, and that might be really helpful in some situations. But otherwise, if you're worried about that, just repaint it back in. It'll probably look cleaner anyway. But it's a nice way to kind of get an overall feel or mood over that whole portion of the painting. Unify it a little bit. Doesn't always work, but yeah, it's not always the best for every situation, but it's nice to have in your arsenal. So I know myself, I was always worried about, like, oh, I can't just paint over it. That's going to make it bad. It's like, no, you just got to be careful, look at the result, and then decide. So now it's kind of washed out a bit, so I'm going to go ahead, finish my little gradients here, and then go in with a harder brush again and reestablish the contrast and those edges and everything. And whatever else I want to read. There we go. Okay. Now with the leaves. Cool. Pop those out a bit. Getting there. All right, now let's move on to the helm and the other wood next. All right, we're going to continue with the helm, followed by the other wood on his body, arms and post, and then I think we'll take care of the ropes on his hand holding the sword there. So let's first go and focus on the head, and we can go ahead and color pick from the other wood we did, like before, and use those tones to kind of flesh it out more. We have a pretty good blocking in there. So let's see here. On the helmet as well, so I'll probably use a little brighter highlights. Not too much because we'll do another pass for that later, but let's see how they show up. All right, cool. So I'm just going to go in and apply the same kind of ideas that we did with the other wood. Going and adding those kind of beveled edges and edging in general. Now, another probably smarter way to have done this in hindsight would be to do all this detailing, including all the highlights and shadows within the detail, flat, as in like none of the bigger lighting, because we kind of blocked out the shade going around the head. And we could get around this by using another, for instance, like overlay layer and stuff like that. So that's another way to kind of take care of it if you rather get in this kind of detail earlier and then go over it with a layer effect afterwards. But this, as long as we pay attention to how the actual values are, it should be fine. We just gotta make sure we shift into darker and darker colors. But we'll probably be going over it again anyway in our next pass. But just throwing out there another way to handle it. Yeah, do the inside here too. Let's grab a dark color and I'm going to go in and sketch it in. Doing the same thing in here as we are already doing out there, so nothing new here. Just kind of giving it some deets. Just trying to make the lighting pretty generic in here too, because the top down. We've been focusing mostly on like front 3/4 lighting. Okay, that should fit the bill. Get back to the sides. And grab darker color here. Just try to push these in more. Let's hide everything else. Let's save it, and then we'll kind of hide everything else to make it easier. Now, adding contrast here is going to make everything pop a lot more. It's going to make your details kind of read. So be more accurate with them than your previous strokes, because they'll stand out more from being like the darkest and the lightest colors. I mean, there's points you could honestly smudge, or I guess fudge a lot of it. But if you come in clean with your contrasted like heavy darks and heavy lights, and they look right in the right spot, it'll sell the rest of it a lot more too, which is nice because it lets you get like more of a more unrefined but still refined look. Like everything is kind of disorderly and painty, but intentional too, because you got all those things in the right spot. Like I'm trying to be a little less with this dark hair, a little less just throwing it around, and a little more accurate into the crevices that we've already kind of decided, I suppose. What we're doing is basically doubling down on those shapes. And you don't have to completely agree with your previous decisions too. If you're like, okay, this line I kind of want over here more, feel free to do that and then just correct the lighting around it. There's no harm in doing that. But we can see already just from adding the darks and a little of the highlights, it's reading a lot better. It feels more finished. We'll take those slabs and we'll just kind of, it's subtle, but we're selling that, hey, this is a separate piece instead of just having it be flat. Same with the edges here. It's like a really sharp edge. If anything, I just want to put one more color to transition it. You get that plane change, makes it feel like it's a lot higher poly than it is. Well, maybe not a lot higher poly, but you get the idea. It feels like there's one more thing of detail there, because we're getting the idea of, okay, that's turning inwards instead of just that hard, sharp edge. And add like a little subtle gradient here. Gradients are, I found, one of the most useful things to kind of pay attention to and make sure you're adding in a lot of your surfaces, because it's kind of selling the light traveling across the plane. One side of the plane might be lighter and darker depending on which one's closest to the brightest point of the light or wherever the light's pointing. In this case, you're kind of making it up as you go, and we're saying, okay, the light's kind of pointed down a little in the center of him around his chest to shoulder area. So if that's the case, maybe it'll hit down here a little stronger than it will up there because it's closer to the corner. There's more things including the light, that kind of thing. So very subtle, but I think a lot of those things add up together into something that's pretty powerful. quite dark down there, so I'm gonna lighten it up slightly. Not that people will really be seeing under there, but just in case. Make it a little less powerfully black. It kind of felt like it was untextured, so I just wanted to add a little more light. Maybe it's bounced up. Because even though it's at 5%, it's pretty down there. Super low res too from where we were. Let's just get rid of that hard line at least. It's always weird with the symmetry. The good thing about using wood, or I guess texturing wood, is that it has a lot of surface nuance usually. So there could be a lot of like kind of painted artifacts from just smudging your paint around, and it'll look right at home. So I'm not completely in love with the shape, but yeah, I like it better than the other one. Gonna keep propagating the highlights now. I want to make sure I zoom out more too. I feel like I've been too zoomed in, and it's causing me to stiffen up. So zooming out and just kind of going at it instead of being so uptight about it. Just lightening the highlights a little more. Do one more pass. Kind of pull in the sweet spots. Just like to tap some highlights here or there. A lot of times I find when I'm painting looser, I'll wind up getting a better result too, just because you feel free to experiment more. You just kind of go at it. You could always paint over it, right? And experimentation is a good way to learn things. It's a good way to get results that you didn't necessarily plan but kind of are hoping to achieve. Just gotta throw some paint on there and see what works. Doesn't work for every occasion, but for the most part, it's always good to have a go at it, I think. The result will look less stiff too. Okay, I'm gonna do some slight shading here. I know we could do more later, but I'm gonna do a little right here. The purpose being just to slightly reduce the contrast in some areas and just a value tweak, because right now it looks kind of flat to me overall as opposed to the sides. Like it's looking kind of flat, and we'll do that. We're gonna have another pass specifically to address this, but in the meantime, I think just adding a little light there, knock down some of the contrast and dealing with the brightness at the same time. So we feel the form a little more. We'll do it in the front as well. There we go. Sometimes too much contrast, it'll draw your attention, but it can be distracting as well. So you gotta keep that balance of like, okay, am I reading my shapes properly? Yes. Okay, good. Otherwise, you also have to assess, like the level of contrast I had in Helm before. Sometimes it feels a bit busy, and so reducing the contrast will reduce the busyness as well, and hopefully help you focus on the overall form instead of just like, oh, look at all those lines in the wood. Unless you want that to be your focus specifically, I would advise against it. All right, there's the before and after. So we definitely popped that a little more, gave it a little more life. I might do the edging up a little more, pretty slightly, but just to call out a little more thickness around the shapes. So unhide the helm now. You get to see it in context with the rest of it. I like it. I like it. Let's do the rope real quick. So this is a kind of a small piece of the puzzle and kind of sloppy. I'm just gonna keep it that way. Probably adds a little more yellows, add a little more contrast, and then knock it down. Okay. Slightly yellower. So I don't want it to be too close to the sword. And we also have the arms that we're competing with, so we'll have to go orange, yellow. That kind of thing. We'll mix it up. We don't have to do too much to this, thankfully. You can add a little more volume to the ropes themselves. Now this isn't going to be a very shiny object. I want it to be a little brighter towards the top, so hopefully it doesn't appear shiny. Go with a hard brush too. It's super low res, so I want it to feel like it has kind of that ropiness. Just gonna kind of sketch in the shape. Make it feel hopefully a little fuzzy. I don't know if that's working, to be honest. Not a huge fan. Might have to try it a little differently. Let's try flowing along with it. the low resness plus like the random strokes I did didn't quite work. And this is something that we're going to have to reduce the contrast of too, because it's quite contrasty right now. Let's take a look at it in context again. Okay. Only really concerned with the front and back views, to be honest, so take a look at the back view next. I'll lock the arms and the sword here so I don't accidentally paint on them. I'm going to reduce some of the contrast on the sides while darkening it. I think just removing some of that contrast is helping it a lot. Because it got a little too dark in some of those spots. We added a little saturation in there too. Uh-oh. Try that again. Uh-oh. I'll give it a second. Otherwise, we'll save it as another one. I don't want that to happen. Save. All right. Sometimes that happens, and it's like, you know what? I'm going to save it as another one just in case. So I'll increment save there. Don't want any problems with the file. Okay. So I think we want to go on and do the arms and the post next. And we could do all the detail on there and then decide on a final color later. Like I might desaturate it, or I want to make it a little more distinct from the other colors going on with him, whether or not I change his main or primary color or just the arms. I think there's ways we could differentiate it. For now, let's just get it up rendering wise to the level as the rest. All right, let's tackle the other wood here. Let's zoom around. I'm going to you can see the seam there. We'll handle that. I'm going to unlock the arms and I'm going to hide everything else. We're going to take care of these like the other stuff. Now, we do have a shadow already under the hand there, which I'm probably going to ignore for now, and then we'll add it back in there after. So thankfully, these are mirrored. So we only got to paint one of them. But let's go ahead. I'm going to grab a hard brush, and I'm just going to start painting on it. And I want to remember that my lighting is coming kind of from front and above. Right now it's kind of a bit dark in the front, so I'm going to lighten that up a little first. And then I'm going to do basically kind of what we did with the other wood, where I'll go in, I'll reinforce some of the darks, add some highlights, and then just make sure we're happy with the shapes. I'm almost thinking that maybe these shouldn't even be rounded. Maybe it should be like a stump, like flat on the end with just some cut wood. So we'll see. I'll texture it one way, and then we can decide later if we want to have it chopped off. I'm thinking it might be cool having it chopped off, but obviously we have to change the UVs around, and we'll have to repaint it. But that shouldn't be too big of a deal. So we'll decide if we want to. It might be nice just to be able to show you guys the process for that, in addition to what we're going to do with the bolts on the shield and the hat, or the helmet. All right, so I'm going to grab dark, and then I'm going to, let's saturate it. Let's give it a little more color. I'm going to grab the color we already have, saturate it and darken it. There we go. Sometimes if you just use black or white, it's going to get muddy. And you want to avoid muddiness, especially in this kind of texture style. So we'll go through now, and then just add these shapes in. Now it's very soft looking right now from how we painted it before. We will be addressing that. Now I don't want my thickness on these to be even completely. You want to make sure you're taking advantage of that pressure sensitivity. I like to darken it towards the start and ends of the strokes a lot of times, but it depends where they are. If it's like a intersection of stuff, I'll usually darken it more to imply that it's a deeper crevice or whatnot. But just having some variety in shapes like that will give your texture a little more interest, and it'll just feel more real, I guess. Because nothing in real life is probably going to be that static. If it's mechanical, yes, it makes sense. But since this is based off an organic material, we want to make sure that we're treating it that way. Okay, we got some darks blocked in. Now I'm going to focus on just like flattening the planes here, because it is round, but I like the idea of it like kind of being like chunky round, right? So not completely smooth or round, but in like almost like segments, but just I just want to avoid like it transitioning from like it being soft from one part of this shape to another. I don't want it to feel like bubbly. So I'm going to do my best to basically color sample and then just paint what I have there flat a bit. It'll kind of make it feel like it's more faceted. But we'll work on that too. So it doesn't feel, again, mechanical. Now you want to think about it in planes. Like so, the directionality of the wood. So we're making it feel a little chunky, but we want to make sure that like, okay, this plane, the darker one is essentially the shadow side. So maybe that's pointing down a little and it's that thick, right? And this one's facing the light. So we're just keeping all that in mind. Now, all this is probably going to be hidden. If not, we'll touch it up. Let's see. Yeah, a lot of that is hidden, so we don't have to worry about texturing past this point right over here. I'm just going to make a little note here for myself. And it is dark under there, so we're going to want to keep that in mind for later. We'll do a shadow pass. I like to break things up into passes like this, mostly because it's easier to focus on one thing at a time. And you could, like, obviously I noticed it, right, when we're looking under his shoulder pads, looking at this part of the arm. It's something that occurred to me. It's something I was like, okay, I want to take care of this. But if I go ahead and just paint it all in right now, it's going to add another level of complexity that maybe I don't want to think about right now. Maybe it's going to distract me from the other task I was doing, which is just to kind of clean this up. And so it's up to you if you want to just handle it all right then. I think there's a benefit to having it done in another pass, so you focus just on that, to having it done in another layer gives you a little extra control. Now, obviously, you could flatten it back down afterwards, and then paint on it then. But for now, I just kind of like the breaking it into separate phases. So we're just gonna keep an eye on where that is. So if I hide everything else, that means it's like right here. So we don't have to worry about anything past that. And just like with the other wood, it's very contrasty. Like, I don't mind the look of it, but we also have to keep in mind that is not our center of interest. And so having that much contrast there might be a disservice to the overall picture. And this is something you don't have to decide right away, but I'm seeing it there and I'm just like, I'm just going to knock it back a little. Again, just choosing a color that's kind of representational of what I want that value to be. Obviously in the same kind of color range, and just painting over it very lightly. There we go. So we got before and after on the arm too. Just feels a lot cleaner, a lot more intentional. It's actually kind of working, even with that color, I think, because of now the material is more defined on there. We still want to figure out what to do with the end here. We could just polish it up, but I kind of like the idea of the cut end and just having like the rings. We'll see. We'll see. It is to be determined. I'll figure it out. Just adding a little saturation back into the undersides. There we go. Kind of ties it in more with the other one. All right. Save it, and now let's handle the bottom one. So I'm gonna have both visible at the same time. Again, being able to color pick is very valuable here. There we go. All right. Now I'm gonna do some like really soft bevels on each side. The colors are already there. I'm just gonna kind of thicken them up a little, and clean them up a little. This kind of thing. It just makes it feel a little thicker, which I like for this style. Another fun way to paint wood is just starting with just a dark, kind of saturated. I mean, it depends what kind of wood you're going for, but a dark saturated color, and then building up with a big, um, like flat brush, and just doing kind of wood-like shapes in the dark, and just building up like that. It'd be really fun. It's kind of like that. Okay, start with there, and then you're just building up the color a little at a time. You're only using enough pressure to get to the next stage of light that you need, and then you just use your pressure sensitivity to kind of build up until you like the contrast, so you get all the values that you need to represent the surface. Okay, so same thing with the arms. Right now, it's a little too busy. There's a little too much going on. So I also think I kind of made some of the details a little too thick here. It might have been helpful to have it visible while we were doing it, but that's okay. We could just knock it back. Same thing as before. Get a value that kind of represents what you're looking for. Soft brush, and then just lightly brush it in there. Let me go a little darker, especially for the back. There we go. And then remember, ahem. And then remember, you can go back in afterwards to build back up some of the contrast you had in there. So now I might pick a darker color again and go in and say, okay, I want some contrast in some of these crevices. Don't want to go overboard though, because otherwise you're taking the attention again away from the rest of your model. Now it's important that there's consistency. Like you might want, or you might be thinking, oh, well, the rest of my model is that contrasty. I want that level of contrast. Well, then you just got to be careful that there's not going to be a focal point, right? So contrast is another way that we can basically determine a focal point. So if we want us, our viewers, to look at in this case, the face of the dummy, well, then maybe we want most of our contrast to be located in his face. So while we didn't do that part yet, we will, and we're going to try to keep things like that in mind. His value is really important contrast-wise to demand attention, but so is color and hue, saturation, all that. In this case, I'm going to use the brighter edge color to kind of pull this closer together. I felt like maybe it was too big of a gap. But we'll handle a lot more of this next pass. At least getting back to its roundness, because you've seen it's kind of flattened out. I'll round it out a little just by having this kind of center plane pulled out a little more. There we go. It feels like it's rounder again. Hmm. 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 Okay, cool. It's not 100% how I want it. Trying to decide here. Still, it's just too bold. I like it, but it's too bold. Like, as a piece of wood, I like it, but as a post underneath this guy, it's just demands too much attention. I think it's because there's too much detail carved in. So I'm just gonna flatten it out, see how I feel. It just had too much going on, like detail-wise for the wood, and I think the arms might be the same way, but they didn't stand out to me in the same manner. A lot of this stuff really is just evaluating your work, making a mark, stepping back, saying, okay, is this achieve what I want it to achieve? Does it fit within the greater picture? And the more you do this stuff, the more you get confident with the decisions you make, but you're also training your eye to kind of pick up on stuff like that. It's like, is that pulling my attention over there too much? Now, whether or not this was the right choice, we'll see if we come back and touch it up more. I feel happier about it not being as busy as it was. It still needs more form work and stuff like that, but we got that coming. That definitely feels better to me, I think. At least I'm going to say it does. I'm going to say it does for the sake of time here. And if we decide it needs another pass later, we could give it another pass. It's not, I mean, to be fair, you're not supposed to be looking at that really at all. It's not where your attention should be. So if we look at the main area, does that serve what we need? Yeah. I'll give it a little more dark, so then we'll move on. Thanks for bearing with me, but this kind of stuff is gonna happen. And it's just a matter of getting through and problem solving it. Remember to save. I realize I'm probably mostly talking to myself when I say that. I don't know how many of you are going to be working alongside me with something like this, probably on your own project. But still a good habit. Okay, we gotta get away from that thing. Okay, one other thing I want to do real quick that I just noticed is that we have the alpha down there on our grass, but I would like to also make sure that it is on the shirt thing properly. So I'm going to go through and add that real quick. Where's it? Okay. Just these cuts here. I think that was the main areas, yeah. There we go. That way we don't have to remember that later. Just handled it right now. Okay, cool. So now we're moving on to probably the rocks and then the body and shoulders. So I'm going to save it one more time. We'll continue. Okay, so let's go ahead and start rendering these rocks. I'm just going to do on the first paint layer here because I didn't paint on the rocks yet there. And let's solo these out, unlock them, and then we're just going to do some simple painting. I don't want to go too crazy here. So I'm going to choose my hard brush. These rocks have a lot of hard shapes. And then let's just go and paint some stuff in. So I'm just looking to chisel out some shapes here. Thinking about the planes of the rock, the directions things are facing. Actually, let's see it in context. Now, the shape isn't super complex or anything, so I'm going to try to stick to the model a little bit, but then I'm also going to deviate with some of it because from the viewpoint that we're going to be seeing it, it's not going to be a huge deal. I just kind of want to have a cool shape. Kind of having the lighting come forward a bit instead of the lightest point on the top. I'll probably have the highlights a little brighter, but otherwise you see how we have the brightest lights kind of up and towards us. And it's good to try to keep it as consistent as you're able. You could break the rules here and there, but whatever looks best to you, but otherwise try to keep the lighting consistent or it'll kind of fall apart. Might not even really look at the geo much at this point. I also want to try to keep these pretty simple, so I might not go much further than this, plus some damage. So we want to keep in mind where our point of interest is, which is up here. It's this guy, not the rock. So it might even help to keep the rock a little bit sloppy. Not like sloppy, but in the idea that it's not our point of interest, so we don't have to be as tight with the painting. adding a little interest, some cracks and stuff. Try to keep it pretty minimal though, if I can help it. They're really soft right now, so that's why the hard brush is important to kind of get those sharper shapes, unless you're intentionally doing like a softer stone, because rocks can obviously be really soft as well. In this case, I'm kind of going for a more chiseled one. And as always, zooming out can help tremendously. When you start feeling like you're over detailing or that you're lost in what you're doing, and that maybe, hey, it's not quite feeling right, zoom out for sure. Okay, I think they're working pretty well for what we need them to do. I might darken the sides on this one a tad. I still want to roughly follow the geometry as far as how it turns. I know I was ignoring a lot of it, but for the turning, I kind of want to follow it at least a little. We'll go in, we'll hit it with some lighter, some highlights, just to finish it off. And we'll probably revisit a little later on the polish phase. We'll see. Don't want to overdo this either. Might be a little overkill. I'm going to knock them down slightly, simply by grabbing one of the colors, making my brush pretty big, lower opacity, and then just brushing over the whole thing slightly. So it knocks back the contrast. It was a little too demanding there, and then pulls it back. There we go. That feels a little better to me. They're still a little too detailed right now, but we'll get to that. In polish, if it stands out to us still, we'll knock it back some more. We're going to do some surface detailing on it as well, most likely, I mean. And then we can give it another pass using our fresh eyes at that time. Because sometimes it helps to go away from something for a little and then come back and see how it feels. You might notice things that you haven't. So if you're getting stuck in one of your projects and you're not sure how to proceed, sometimes just having time away from the computer or doing a different activity completely can really have a big impact. Okay, I'm going to save this. And then we'll move on. Oops. Oh no. And we'll move on. All right, I think maybe let's do the shoulders now. Again, I'm going to check paint layer. Okay. Didn't paint on them at all on the first one. I painted on the second one for the tops of it. So I'm just going to paint on the first one here. Let's see, shoulder pads, boom. And I'm thinking to keep this really simple. I might just make it a little more metallic. We're not going to go too crazy with this, to be honest. But let's put some interest in there. So I'm going to start by pushing in these a little more, the crevices, and then pulling back out the edges. So by using a thicker brush here, I'm essentially saying that this lip is thicker and it's just going to feel heftier that way. So we'll go through, and I'll make those marks all the way across. remember, it is mirrored. Oh, it isn't mirrored. Derp. I saw that line. I was like, oh, that's mirrored front to back. No, I didn't do that. Okay. It is mirrored left to right. That's probably what I was thinking. Yeah, let's go with that. That's what I was thinking. Okay, so first we thicken this up, and then I'm going to go through and I'm going to do I'm going to do a highlight first, but then we're going to go in and basically paint over it, the surface of it, kind of like we did here, and then I'll probably pop the highlights back in, but we'll start with some highlights just to get that edging. Bring that shape forward. Try to keep it somewhat subtle, and then we might turn it into wear as well. So this is kind of going to be the underpaint of it, and then I'm going to jump forward to the other paint layer that we have there, and then just really go ham on top of it. So almost ready for that. So I'm just going to give the surface a little kapow here. I'm just going to like mess it up a bunch to make it have the impression that it's kind of worn. Sometimes I'll just kind of pepper the surface with some paint strokes. Same on the back. Now I might, as with earlier, I might put in some damage here or there just to remind me, because I do want to do a damage pass later. I'll usually do that on top of the regular paint passes. That way I can just focus on one thing at a time. Sometimes otherwise I get a little distracted or forgetful. And I find it helps me to just focus on a thing or two at once. There we go. You see how it just gave the surface a little more interest, a little more info. And we'll start with that, and then we're going to go a lot crazier with the second paint layer. And when I say crazy, I mean I'm not talking like super crazy or anything, but more than that. So already right there, you can see the difference. We started there, and we gave it a lot more. Like it's already reading way better, and kind of in line with the other stuff. But let's go in, give it some more love. So I jump to the other layer, and first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to degreenify the bevels on the edge, because they're right up against this, so I'll probably gray them a little. And it's really up to us being creative here. Do we want to actually bounce the green onto the metal? That might be cool. So we might find like an in-between. It could be cool to have some of that green bouncing out. I'm going really subtle with it though. I don't want to make too bold of because we still have it being a little darker. But sometimes changing the hue there just pulls them closer together visually. They're in the same physical location, and the light would be bouncing off of one probably nearby. So I'll give it a little of that. But going back to what I was saying, I'm going to take this green, I'm going to bring it a little towards yellow and desaturate it, and let's just see how that feels. A lot of this is experimentation based on just knowledge of painting other stuff and what might look good, plus how the light might actually function in a real world environment. So there we go. That stays a little darker and greener, but we have some of that gray now. Looks a little more metallic, I think. And all this stuff is pretty subtle. Yes, that's true. But it can make all the difference. While we're here, I might as well fix some of the edging here. Got that weird dark line. Just gonna bevel it a little better. Okay, let's do some of the edge. And I'm going to do the crevices a little more too. Or the cavities, if you will. I don't want to overdo it. Depending on the style you're going for, sometimes you want that really stark contrast. Sometimes you want to keep it a little more subtle. That's the hard part with a lot of this, is it's going to come down to what you're looking to achieve or the art style that you're trying to follow. Right here, we're just kind of doing general, which is why I'm kind of trying to mention that, you know, these are the type of practices I follow, but you're not bound to that completely. It's going to depend. Okay, now I'm going to pull out the edges a bit more. Maybe scrape some of that saturation away on the edges. So I'm going to get a little brighter. And I'm going to get a little sloppy with it. And then this metal, maybe we'll have it saturate a little in the shine. Because this is kind of like worn, is what I'm thinking. Having it desaturated. So like, okay, maybe it's like some worn away in those parts. And then the actual metal that's still there and shiny. Maybe let's try adding a little saturation. That's kind of cool, huh? Add a little more contrast to make it feel more metallic. Sometimes I have to pull it back in. We're probably going to go in and do a little more specific highlights later on for stuff like the metal, just to really pop it even more, but I still want it to read in the meantime. Now, one thing you can do when you have it close to how you're liking it for something like this, obviously I want to use the same colors on the front, or at least close to it. So what I can do in this case is I'm going to bring up, oops, sometimes the save is geeking out on me. See, look at that. Go to textures and then texture UV editor, which I have over here, and you can see it here, and you can actually tear this off. I'm just going to paint in this little thing on the side here. But you could tear it off and paint on the flat. So here I could just color pick, and then using this as a visual reference, go in and start adding those colors to the front side. And now I know it's going to be using the same colors. Now, they don't have to be exact. A lot of times it might be more interesting if you have them deviate a little, but for the most part, in this case, I'm just going to try to match them. There we go. Now I've used that to the point where I got what I needed out of it, and I can start painting back in this view. Okay, let's see how that looks in context with this guy. It might be a little too out there. We could pull it in a little. I'll do that just by using a similar color, and I'll just paint it really lightly. I'm going to bring in a little more saturation too. And to make it feel like metal, we're going to have to put in those highlights again, but right now I'm just going to darken it. Give it like a little wash. Okay, did I go ham enough? I might have went a little too ham. Get myself distracted. Maybe a little too much damage. There, we'll simplify it to that. So, started at that. Got our edges and stuff on there, which looked fine, but I wanted to get a little more metallic in there. There we go. Save this time. It's saved. All right. Cool. I think if I hit save too often, it geeks out on me. Like, I have a tendency to save constantly because I don't want to lose my work. But sometimes it flips out my hard drive. Okay, so at this point, let's do, I think, the body, the tabard, and the actual body, and then the head. So let's see. I'm going to do on paint 2. Let's hide some stuff. I'm going to lock the things I don't want to accidentally paint on. And let's see here. I think I'll start painting on it. I have a subtle gradient on there already, so I'm going to leave that. And I'm going to just focus on like surface detail for now. So let's go ahead and solo it. Maybe we can look at the shoulder pads on there. So we're going to want to paint a little more shadowing around there. It's subtle, it's there, it works, but we might add a little more. Let myself get distracted. Usually when I paint, it's like go all over the place. I'm trying to keep it a little more contained right now, just so we could focus on one thing at a time, which is usually the case. But if you see something you want to fix, man, you gotta fix it. Okay. So let me grab. I'm gonna try to do the detail on this. Let's go ahead. Maybe this trim is like shiny. We'll see. But I'm gonna start with defining the edge as if it's like sewn or something, but there's a division there of some sort. And we'll pull out the other side too. We'll pop out this edge with a little brighter silver once I finish drawing this line out. Okay. So push that in. That gave it a little more detail. It's already looking better just having these kind of things. And when I say, let me be clear. When I say these kind of things, transitions between different parts can be really powerful. Anytime you have something intersecting something else. When I was doing environment art, a lot of this came up. It's if you put a tree down, have some rocks grounding it, or have some grass around the base and things to ground other things. And so this is reminding me of that, in which we had these two things right next to each other, but with no clear thing merging them or kind of relating them. It's just kind of a transition, so it helps to have that. Now I'm going to add a lighter one, kind of popping this edge out. Hopefully it works. I'm actually not sure how this is going to work or not. I feel like it'll work. Let's see how it works on the outside edge too. I don't want to go too hard. Let's take a look at it in context. That can work. I think that can work. It feels a little too empty without it, I think. So we might not want it as bright, but we could have it there. Now, like we did with the shoulder pad, I think I'm going to go in and add a little yellow to the sides here from his body. So the light would be hitting his body and then reflecting subtly, and maybe adding some yellow on the sides. I'm going to actually try this with the fill tool. So if you press this button up here, it's the polygon. So let's try. I'm going to sample this, and then I'm going to make it low opacity, and then boop, paint it on. There we go. Maybe a little less opacity. There we go. It kind of harmonizes a little. This is too gray. That brings it in. Yeah, I like that. Maybe not on this one, because there's nothing there bouncing. But the insides, sure. If things feel out of place, sometimes it's just a matter of something like that. Just adding a little color. Look at the surrounding colors. Think about what might be bouncing to it. and then just spritz it on there. Boom. I mean, we could say the same. I think I already did it here. Yeah. We got some on there, and then the inside of the hat could use some too. But I don't want to go too hard because it's supposed to be really dark in there. Keep it dark for now. Let's see here. Okay. Let's go back to my regular brush. And let's paint in a little. No, we'll save the lighting for later. Well, we'll put in a tiny bit. So what I'm going to do is just imply a little shine on this. Just a little. Just a tiny bit. I go right here. Have it get a little brighter in the front. That's chest. There we go. Just so we know the light's hitting him, right? So we'll give him a little fall off of the light. Maybe very subtly down here. And then I'm going to pull those highlights up on the edges again. And then similar in the back, but not as hard. Remember, shift is smooth. I love it. Okay. So that's come along. But now we have to do something to the center of his chest. So I'm going to do something similar. Or do some more subtle lighting on it. And then I actually want to do some more folds and shades and stuff. Because, like, this ain't doing it right now. I should do that first, actually. But let's go ahead. We'll just start painting in there. He doesn't have... he doesn't have too much anatomy. So I'm just going to kind of keep it really general and generic. kind of soft. Something like this could also be done in our lighting phase because it's going to have a lot to do with moving the light and shadow around. But I want to get it in here a little. You can accomplish so much in each of the different phases that it's like, should I do this here? Or maybe I'll do it when I'm doing that. So like the lighting stuff, man, controls so much of how your result is going to be. That's why we're keeping it particularly flat right now. Like it works, but when we push it more, you'll see it's like, oh, okay, it stands out a lot more now. Oopsies. Should probably save that for the other phase, but we'll just keep rolling. I think I'd rather keep it simpler than not. And around his shoulders, there might be some pinching. Why don't we try that? Why don't we do that in the lighting instead of me try to be a hero and paint it in right here? Might add a little more red in the shadows there. There we go. Sometimes if shadows get a little too desaturated, they look really muddy. So even if it's not realistic, sometimes we'll just add in a little extra saturation. Okay, we did the front there. I'm going to do the back. And let's see if we do the same thing here. We can kind of see the front and the back separate. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just going to color pick here and swap over. This is the other way of handling that. But there's not as much color-wise going on, so should be fine. Just trying to make it look like it's bent a little, which I should probably put into the red too if I'm going to do that. You know, like it's bunched up there, that kind of thing. There we go. And let's do the bottom now. It's kind of weird because I have that slit in the middle. That's okay. We'll just have all the fold lines coming down from the belt. Cool. Now I'm going to brush over it a little, slightly, just to remove a little of the contrast. Let me get a little more saturation in there. I might have to do a pass on the whole thing. Right now, like I like it when it's more saturated, but I shouldn't just do it to just that spot. So Probably do it to the entire thing. It's really subtle for now. We'll do it to the front too. Just subtle. Okay. Okay, so we got the front and the back of that going. You know, we could polish it up more as we continue, but it's doing the job. It's doing the job. Now, I'm a big fan of bounce light, so you'll see me doing it pretty often, like right there. I just grabbed a little of the belt, and you gotta keep it subtle, but I feel like it does make a nice difference. You gotta keep it subtle. I'll give you one more example as well. One more example would be putting some of the red here, just a little on the belt and on that. So we'll go and put a little there. Let's get rid of the buckle. Just enough that you notice. And then with the buckle, let's unlock it, and then same thing. Just gonna put a little along the top, and that's gonna immediately, right? That stands like that, or that looks visually like it's kind of floating in space. I mean, still looks pretty nice, but once you add the red, it's like, oh, okay, it's getting that light information from nearby. I see. They must be in the same environment. There we go. So I like to pepper that stuff in. I might get heavy-handed on it here and there. That's my own fault for loving it so much. But otherwise, yeah, you don't want it to be like the same color and it just vanishes, right? You still want it to keep its value and everything, but just really subtle amount. It's not really doing much there, but that's okay. No one's gonna see this, but you guys will see it. You guys will see this. Doing this for you. For you. Because bounce light will also brighten things. Even just a little, but it will brighten things. You still want there to be the distinction, though, between the objects. So, like, in this case, like a little dark line between them or something. But it should be fine. Let's get the shield stuff back out. Oh, yeah, we got that on there. Okay, so we got a bunch of that painted. It looks like what's left before we start doing a lighting and polishing pass would be the body itself and then the face. I'm dreading the face. We'll put a bunch of stitches and stuff in there, but we'll make sure it pops out. So we gotta do those. And then we'll go on to a lighting pass. And then maybe some damage, polish, key variations, all that stuff. We'll get there. We're working our way there.